Hello to everyone online. Welcome. We've had some really cool Lunchbox sessions over the last quite a few months now, but this one's really exciting. So I just wanted to make some brief introductions. So we actually have a panel which you guys can't see, but they will jump up and talk into the screen when they speak. But we've actually got a panel today, panel session. So many of you will know, well, definitely one of the speakers, or two of the speakers, one being Andrew O'Neill, the other one being Bill Dennison. Not many of you will know, or potentially won't know, Paul Chatterton. So the speakers today we were fortunate enough to be at International River Symposium in Vienna. I know someone had to do it back in 2022, and we chaired a panel at the time around investment and exploring environmental markets and looking at how do we actually start to get investment into Southeast Queensland in particular. And I was lucky enough to be the chair, and these three gentlemen to my left were the panel. So they're going to take you guys through the same sort of session as we did when we were in Vienna with the presentation. You've probably heard it. So the panel today, we have Dr. Andrew O'Neill, who is going to be the moderator and provocateur, which is a word I learned from my gorgeous friend Eva. We also have then Professor Bill Dennison. Bill is here as Maryland University and also Darwinian. Bill, for those of you that don't know him, is kind of the godfather of report cards. He's been part of the Healthy Land and Water team since inception, and he's still on our journey with us. So he'll talk about where his journey is taking him around the world and sort of the importance of report cards and that evidence and in decision making. We're really fortunate and very privileged to have Paul Chatterton from Vienna. We're really fortunate enough to have this opportunity to sort of talk about where globally landscape finance is going and looking at that landscape scale approach to restoration and rehabilitation. So I'm going to step out of the screen now. Andrew's going to jump up, and then the two gentlemen will also present. So thank you, everyone. I'm so glad you're all here. Right, over to you.
Thank you. And welcome everyone online. And I can't turn the screen around because there's tables and it's a workplace health and safety issue. But the office is full. And so thank you everyone who came in person. It's a couple of reunions. Hello, Nicola. This is like a reunion of the Marine Botany Lab from UQ from 20 years ago. A reunion of before we I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land which we meet. Where we are right here is the Yagara-Yugarapu people's land. I would pay my respect to elders past, present, emerging, and also acknowledge and pay my respects to other traditional owners and First Nations people in the room or and around our beautiful region. As Julie mentioned, we had the opportunity of presenting together in Vienna on the subject of environmental markets. And for those of you like me who, well, Paul doesn't have this problem, but I certainly do. I struggle with where are we going with environmental markets? Is it really an opportunity? There's lots being discussed that it is the next big thing in the environmental movement to get funding and change happening where we've struggled to do so in the last decades. That coupled to Southeast Queensland being in this unique position that we have an incredibly valuable set of data that is telling us very clearly that our region, at least parts of the region, have been declining over the past couple of decades. And there's been some notable positive stories for sure, but just overall the message is that we've got some problems and we're not doing nearly enough as a region to turn those trends around. So that's why we initially pulled together the panel to talk about the trends and what's happening with environmental monitoring and reporting globally. As those of you who are online and in the room know, we've been are progressively shifting. I'm working with Bill and others, the monitoring program, to take it from what is a program that tells us about the state. It's really important to know the state, but it's not enough on its own. So we also need to futurecast about what, if we take these actions, how is that going to help? What is needed? Where do we want to go? And then when we get to that point, then we go, okay, how are we going to pay for it? And that's where the environmental markets potentially provide a really valuable and important way of us funding the actions that we think are needed. So without further ado, I'll ask Bill to come up. I'll just load your preso up. Those of you who know Bill will know that he has not only been driving the initial fray of report cards going back, and we've also got Eva and James in the room who were right there at the beginning for the Healthy Waterways story as well. So it's really a great honour. It's really incredible to be in this room with all the people who were there at the beginning and are involved still in the next steps. So I'm just going to fiddle with the screen whilst I get Bill's presentation up. Just bear with me, it's loading. And I'll ask Bill to come up to step up to the mic, as we say.
You say he's godfather, Andrew.
I
Or the grandfather.
no, Godfather.
Godfather.
I've always said the Godfather.
God grandfather.
Not the grandfather.
No, I call him the granddaddy.
He doesn't
Yeah.
make you an offer. I can do a big father. That's all right.
Okay. Now, folks online, would you mind confirming with me that you see the presenter mode, or do you see the full screen mode? Is it good the way it is? Okay.
Full screen now.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, Julie. Wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for having me, and it's great to be back in Brisbane and see this vibrant organization. Last time I came through, it was middle of COVID, and there was just scattered with people, so it's good that we can be back in person. I want to talk about the evolution of social environmental report cards. I got a lot of slides, so I'm going to go through some quickly. And what I consider report cards is the top of the environmental intelligence pyramid. Environmental intelligence I define as timely information shared with all. And so report cards represent a chance to get out to the public and the decision makers in a short and concise form, but it's a pyramid. Underneath that, you need a lot of support. You can't just throw out these grades, although truth be told, when we first did the report card, we did kind of make it up, but we eventually followed through with the ecosystem health monitoring program and developed data-based report cards, and that's something we've carried through. So there's data underneath it, but the top level of synthesis is the report card. And we're using a metaphor. Environmental report cards use the metaphor of school report cards because we've trained people for a dozen years to go to school and get report cards. And so people intuitively understand what it takes to what a good or bad grade is. And it started back, we did a little research on that. It started back at Harvard University in America, and Thoreau was one of the first students that got a report card. Of course, he didn't accept the report card. He didn't. The same guy that wrote on civil disobedience, inspired Gandhi and Martin Luther King, et cetera, said, forget the report cards. But nonetheless, they took hold, and then they spread out to the rest of the universities. We started getting pass-fail. We started getting an A to F grading system. They went online. They developed, various standards of assessment. So report cards are something that are simple and concise. People relate to them. They don't require instructions. They can identify where you need to improve, and you can track it over time, and it provides incentive, a positive peer pressure. I knew we were onto something at Healthy Land Water when the mayors would start calling up 2 weeks before the report card release and said, how am I doing? I said, you got to be plus. Well, how did the next one do? Who's the guy or gal next to us? They're always pitting themselves against one another. And it turns out the mass media really like it. So we developed a whole suite of science communication products, these books that now out of print, but you might have seen around. And my group, the Marine Botany group that Andrew referred to, was at the beginning of this. But report cards are a big part of it. So when I went off in 2002 to Chesapeake Bay in America on the East Coast. I said, let's do a report card. We didn't have to create a HMP. We didn't have to create a monitoring program. There was already plenty of monitoring out there. In fact, it's the best studied estuary in the world. But it wasn't synthesized. In fact, there are 101, literally 101 indicators listed. No priority, no hierarchy. It was just a smorgasbord. And it turns out you could tell whatever story you wanted. You could have the happy talk, or you could have doom and gloom. And the NGOs used the doom and gloom, save the bag, give us money. And the government said, oh, things are great. But in fact, the truth was somewhere in between. And there really, at first, there wasn't much of an appetite for a report card. But it turns out the Washington Post, our local newspaper, ran a Sunday feature article above the fold. That's our local newspaper. And that got the attention of Congress. So then the Government Accountability Office, the Office of Management Budget, and the Inspector General came in, and so they said, you need a report card. So we made a report card using 7 indicators, water quality, biotic indicators. We had plenty of data, 166 reporting stations, generated media attention, just like it does here in Southeast Queensland. And then it turns out that the little river keeper and water keeper groups that work in the tributaries here all developed their own report cards. This is my wife that's interrupting my talk. Thank you, Judy. And what we ended up doing is starting to reimagine the report card. And this was not my first Filipino student, but my most recent Filipino student, Vanessa Vargas Lin, who went around and talked to the leadership of the Chesapeake Bay program. And so what do we see as a vision for Chesapeake Bay? And what they said, as we expected, swimmable, fishable, yeah, that's right. But they said a whole bunch of other stuff: fair and equitable participation. They said meaningful dialogue with diverse groups, and so we realized when we started talking to people, because originally the Chesapeake report card, as the HMP inspired Moreton Bay report card, was just a bunch of scientists. But when we started going out to the public, it became a different story. And that's my message for today: is we have to expand our audience here. So one of the things we said was, well, we got to get in the watershed. That's where the problems are. We have to look at environmental justice. There's a big effort in the U.S. for environmental justice. 4 elements: proximity to hazards. Are you next to an incinerator, a sewage treatment plant, or a landfill? Access to green space. Can you get to safe and green space? Where's the money going? Turns out wealthy counties had sustainability officers who could write and administer grants. The poor counties had a dog catcher, sustainability officer, and the sanitation engineer all wrapped in one. Didn't have time or effort. So the rich counties are getting greener and the poor ones are getting browner. And management governance. Who's dishing this out? Who's controlling the message? So that's something that we've been investigating. I'll come back to that in a second. One of the things we got involved in early in the 2000s is Mississippi River. They came to us and said, that Chesapeake report card looks good. Let's expand that to the entire Mississippi. Mississippi River is about half of the 48% of the lower 48 U.S. states. It's 31 states out of 50. It has multiple values. It's got we did a whole series of interviews with stakeholders, and they said, well, we need to not just focus on environment. We have to work about the economy, river-based economy. We have to think about transportation. Mississippi is a network of rivers and locks and dams for transportation, for grain and other resources. The ecosystem values, of course. Flood control. Mississippi floods regularly, and controlling that becomes very important. Water quantity, the water source, a huge population, and recreation. So when we did the Mississippi report card, we partnered with a whole bunch of agencies and organizations, as always, developed report newsletters, fact sheets, and culminated in the Mississippi report card. And we did this with engaging about 750 people in a series of listening sessions around the watershed. So we went all around the Mississippi and met with dozens and dozens of people each time. Like I said, 750 total, and that really informed the report card, and that was really important. So when it did get released, it went big. It went national news, front page. We got discovered along this lines by somebody that used to work for our big partner in Mississippi was the Nature Conservancy. And then one of the TNC people switched over to WWF, World Wildlife Fund, not the World Wrestling Federation, but the World Wildlife Fund, PANDA. And we developed a partnership called Healthy Rivers for All, and that took us around the world. So WWF has partners in, I don't know, 106 countries or something. And we went to South America and to Africa and to Asia, as well as, you know, other North American and other projects we did around the world. So we've done lots of these report cards. One of the things we did with the Mississippi, with the WWF folks, is did a rigorous survey of report card practitioners, and Healthy Land Water were interviewed as part of that. And what we learned from that is 80% of the people said that these report cards increased the public awareness, but only 50% said they actually affected stakeholder behavior. 60% said they had a positive impact on the basin. 86% said that they increased the demand for information. So basically, report cards, yes, they increase awareness. They get the message out. But do they actually institute change? Maybe, not always. And so that's the key that we have to recognize. But interestingly, 97% said they're definitely the way to go. So report cards are popular. We published a practitioner's guide with WWF, and I know the San Antonio River, one of the River Prize recipients, took that booklet, did their own report card based on that. We also have a companion indicators booklet. Now, what's actually brought me to Australia this trip is to initiate our first session of this postcard project in person. And this stands for Coastal Ocean Assessment for Sustainability and Transformation. It's funded by the Belmont Forum. This is a unique international organization. Each country that participates supplies their funding. So they have to be transnational projects. At least 3 countries have to be transdisciplinary, which means they have to have stakeholder engagement, multidisciplinary science. Sadly, the Australian Research Council isn't part of Belmont Forum, so we couldn't partner with Australia, but we did partner with Norway, Japan, Philippines, and India. And what we're doing with the report card is we're combining 3 elements. We're doing a report card to measure status. We're doing system dynamics modeling with a team from Norway, the University of Bergen, and we're doing social network analysis to look at who's who in the zoo and who we need to affect change with. But here's my message. We started actively listening for our Chesapeake report card. We went out and developed listening sessions. And because of COVID, we've been doing these with tents outdoors, sometimes in better weather than others. It turns out tents are very good for stopping rain coming down, not so good for rain coming sideways, but nonetheless, we've managed to get pictures of the nice days here. And we got people, which is really interesting. We got your half of this circle are round up the usual suspects, people from NGOs and government who normally come, but half were random people that just happened to be at that site that we roped into engaging with. So we got a broad representation, and we asked them a bunch of different questions, you know, your values and threats. And, you know, we use sticky notes and maps and stuff like that to engage. We got a word cloud from what are the threats, and they said pollution, development, climate change. We got a word cloud about the values, recreation, wildlife, nature, etc. We also had them help us come up with indicators to track the status of those values and threats. And what you can see here is, you know, a list of potential indicators generated from one of those listening sessions. We also, part of that social network analysis, identify who we need to be involved. And so we asked them, who do you work with? And we got one set of answers. Then we asked them, who do you want to work with? We got a different set of answers. And an expanded view. So some of these, we got to talk to farmers. We got to go to the faith community, the churches, the synagogues, and we got to connect with youth. We need to get young people involved, not just a bunch of retirees. So we also asked them to help with a shared vision. And again, just like Vanessa's PhD dissertation, we got a broader suite of issues than just ecological. And we got a series of actions that they recommended that we take to do that. So in this Coast Guard project, we're going to do this in Chesapeake Bay, as I just indicated, but we're going to Manila Bay next week. We're going to Tokyo Bay, Sexay Lagoon in Japan, and the Gold Coast of India. And we have, tons of people involved. We've drawn these conceptual diagrams for each of our study sites. This is our Chesapeake, the quick and dirty story of the Chesapeake, the quick and dirty story of the dirty Manila Bay, the Tokyo Bay, which is actually interesting. They have this problem of too few nutrients to grow their seaweed because they've ratcheted down their sewage upgrades have really made a difference, just like in Chesapeake Bay. Ishiaki Island with Sexay Lagoon, which is down near Taiwan, and then the Gold Coast of India. Diverse set of issues. We're talking developed countries. We're talking less developed. We're talking temperate and tropical, big giant estuary like Chesapeake, smaller places. And so if we can come up with something that we can, a shared vision of all of these things, and here's our first draft of that shared vision that we're going to be sharing next week in Manila. And then the last two slides are just an advert. One of the things during COVID, couldn't go out, so we sat there and made a professional certificate online. So we've got, I think, 7,000 people have signed up and to take a series of 4 courses. They're free. It's a MOOC, a massive open online course. We have one on science communication. We have the report card course. We have a science advisory toolbox, and most recently, innovative environmental management models, including the case studies from our Coast Guard project. And so you can go on this edX platform and download these short videos, knowledge checks, and student engagement activities, and follow this through. And this is something that I see as an important way to spread the word and get more people doing report cards. So that's all I wanted to say in this story of evolution of report cards. The great news about our Chesapeake is that we're actually improving. We've got seagrasses back. We've got reduced nitrogen, reduced phosphorus throughout our watershed now into the bay. And so 35 years of management and action does result in positive change, something that, we got to stay the course in Southeast Queensland and keep working to get those improvements here in Moreton Bay and the rivers and waterways. Thanks very much. Be happy to take questions after.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks. We'll get the questions at the end. Thank you, Bill. Now, the way we're going to run this is we're going to, I'm going to ask Paul to come up and give his presentation, and we'll take some questions at the end. For those online, maybe just start, if you have a good question, what's a good question? And if you have a question, all questions are good. Pop that into the chat, and then we've got folks there who'll have a look and pull out the good ones. So make it a good one. For those of you who are here, maybe write your, because there's a lot of people here. I mean, you can't believe it. It's full. Write your question on a piece of paper. Pass it to me with cash. Sorry, I'm just kidding. But I'm not. But make it a good one. Make a good question that can be answered by our panelists, and then we'll have some questions at the end. So I'm just going to, as I'm speaking, I am going to try to do 2 things at the same time. Something I'm not known for. I'm just going to bring up this one. Questions are already starting to come in, so I'll hold those. It's a good question, Anne. Thank you. And see, Susie's going to. Give me 1 second whilst I share. So, next up we have Paul Chatterton. I met Paul just a few months ago in at the conference in Vienna, and he gave a great presentation, which he's going to give now. But we also connected because there was something that I felt that he was offering that was something we were missing, and also he's just a great guy. So that's really positive too. Yeah. So I'll give a very quick introduction because we haven't known each other that long. But Paul worked at the World Wildlife Fund for Nature for many years, 20 plus years, 30 years. Yes, you get more for some serious crimes, in fact. During that time, played a role in the REDD plus, Red Plus, on several continents, major river, protected river areas, like achieved some really great things during that time there. And as part of that process in WWF, we had started a spin-off, which is the Landscape Finance Lab. And so you're going to talk about the Landscape Finance Lab, so I'm not going to steal your thunder. But over to you, Paul, and questions that will come after that.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, Queensland. I don't get to say that much. It's really nice to be here. I live in Vienna. I have done for 15 years, and I think it's just because you spoke the same language as my cousins. I thought you were a cousin that we got on so well. But I want to talk about landscape finance. There's a major revolution going on out there in the financing of nature. And I think we've been talking, you guys can be the tip of the spear, or at least one of the tips of the spears. There's some really big opportunities in Queensland, can grab them really. I think there's a real opportunity. So anyway, first off, where's the money? So this is, am I in the way? Can you hear me back down the back? Yeah. This is a picture of world money flow. Annually, there's about $200 trillion that circulates around the planet. And the money for nature generally comes out of there, that little red box there. Philanthropic money, government money, overseas development aid, tiny. But there's this enormous box here of commercial capital that isn't being applied to nature, and in fact is being applied to destroying nature. So how do we shift that? How do we shift that equation? It's shifting really rapidly. I've been sitting on the standards committee for the Climate Bonds Initiative, which sets the standard for green investments, green bonds worldwide. Bonds are just collections of loans, big collections of loans. When they started, 2012, there were $2 billion worth of green bonds on the planet. Today, there's $2 trillion. Just this year alone, 2/3 of $1 trillion. That's US dollars, so multiply by 1.5. There's 2/3 of $1 trillion new dollars coming to nature and sustainability. So how do we grab some of that? And a few years ago, when you looked at this circle, the money was only going to energy projects, to sustainable building projects, and to transport projects. Today, well, that a couple of years ago, 15%, that had grown to 15% for land use for nature water projects. And I think that's even larger. It will be larger this year. So there's plenty of money out there. The problem is that the bankers don't get out of bed unless you're talking $100 million. And that's much bigger than most nature conservation projects. It's much bigger than most forestry projects. Some agriculture projects get to that scale. How do you get to the point where the bankers will start to talk to you? Well, that's one of the benefits of landscapes. It allows you to put a whole set of projects together. You can put your forestry projects, your agriculture projects, your water projects together in a bundle to solve a larger problem and create synergies. That's the other benefit of doing that. And that allows you to create those $100 million investment packages and get the bankers out of bed. But it's also allows you to think at the scale of nature. All of these projects individually are good, but only by bundling them together and thinking long-term and large scale are we going to really shift the needle. So landscapes is now the standard. I don't need to tell you guys that, but it's being picked up by the corporate world. It's being picked up by the financial world just in the last couple of years, which is really exciting. Ooh, take a breath. There's been a lot of work done in the last 5 years, particularly 5 to 10 years, on the methodology for landscapes. We wrote this book, The Little Sustainable Landscape book, back in 2016. We launched it at the Paris Climate COP. And when we were writing that, we looked at definitions of landscapes, and the landscape approach, there were 80 different definitions. If you had 80 different types of traffic lights in a city, you wouldn't be able to go anywhere. We've now got one form of traffic lights. That's this system. It's a little bit complicated, but I think it's worth taking you through just the basics of it. One thing is that you're designing for 20 years. You can get results for a generation. You can get results quickly, but you want to design for that scale. You want money that's going to last for that length of time. Most grant projects last 3 years, 5 years, if you're lucky. So that's where private capital is quite exciting, because you can think 20, 30 years. We've got a 5-step process, the 5 elements that are pretty simple. They're basically the project cycle done by the landscape partnership, done by the people in the landscape. That's the first step. So look, then get people together. Step 1, look at the problem and look at each other, understand, come to a common understanding, set a plan, vision and a plan, implement that, get financing first, and then monitor and learn. So it's not complicated. And if you do that, you get a whole set of returns, natural, social, financial. But what we're discovering is that it's the return of hope, the return of inspiration, that is actually the most valuable return in landscapes. And I think, Bill, you know this with your report cards, and well, you're actually doing landscape planning with your process. I was really impressed to see the simplification of a complex system that you guys are doing. And then you're having a zoning system, like some sort of zoning system, so nature grows, industry and production is concentrated but grows also, and you've got a zone in between where you're regenerating nature and producing production. All right. Nice in theory. What does it look like in practice? And I'll take you through a couple of different examples that have been happening over the last 5 years, particularly. These are all mostly exceptions to the rules, but they're starting. I think you'll see in the next decade they'll become more and more mainstream. On the left is a carbon project, forest carbon project, that I helped to design with a whole team of people in the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, would you believe? $170 million. It's the last place you'd want to put your $170 million. But it was out of the 5 experiments we kicked off, that was the one that succeeded, and it's still succeeding. This is the habitat, half the habitat of bonobo chimp. This program secures 9 million hectares of rainforest, and it's restoring another 500,000 hectares of rainforest, and it reduces emissions equivalent to the city of Cape Town. Jurisdictional carbon is very complicated, but really, really powerful stuff. And we're thinking, can we do the same thing for riverway forests and for koala forests? It's possible. On this side, so that's basically government money, carbon money, and it's a big market out there today. This was corporate money. So Michelin Tire Company is working. This is Sumatra in Indonesia. a little ribbon of forest that runs across the middle of Sumatra. Michelin Tire Company has a rubber plantation here, 80,000 hectares. And they're terrified, they were terrified that they'd get blamed for the destruction of this forest. That's one of the only places where you find orangutans, tigers, and elephants together. So it's critical forest. We helped put together, the whole team of people put together, this was actually one of the first experiments for the lab, helped put a vision together for 400,000 hectares. That was going to the Green Climate Fund. It got stuck on the president's desk in Indonesia for various reasons. It got picked up by the corporate world, by BNP Paribas and ADM Capital, two investors. $215 million worth of investment is going in there now. And it's really making a difference. I've just been talking recently to some of the people who are working on that. There's a little controversy, but we can talk about that one later. Fiji, we've been working with small business in Fiji, created an incubator for reef protection on one side, and set up a company called Matanataki that it's aiming to get $50 million worth of investment into small businesses that protect the reef. They've just bought some waste dumps and are turning them into recycling centres. $12 million they've got already for that. Sorry, I keep talking US dollars, so you'll still have to do the translation in your head. I'll flip over to Australian dollars. And of course, you know, we were presenting in Vienna, so I had to put in the story of the Danube catchment, but exactly the way that Bill has been talking with the Chesapeake. It's been a very solid program of river cleaning and restoration, not commercially financed though. Can we do commercial finance for the Brisbane catchments is the question. Use some of that money that's out there. Here's a model that we're developing at the moment in Ireland, of all places. So one of the Irish are very proud of their bonds, and they have a lot of it, 700,000 or 1.4 million hectares actually, but there's 700,000 hectares that's degraded. And the good news is that the peatlands are the best carbon storage in the temperate world. And all of these can be restored a lot of this can be restored fairly easily. So there's been piecemeal projects all across Ireland working on this, but never very big. What we're doing in Ireland is bringing together public investment, carbon investment, and commercial investment to invest in 4 sectors to restore the forests, to restore the peatlands, and to bring biodiversity payments. Now, biodiversity payments is coming down the line, and I think Queensland can benefit from that as well. So it becomes an integrated investment program of carbon, biodiversity, and other pieces. All right, that's probably close to enough. I'll wrap up. So just to summarise, here's the typology of landscape finance as we see it at the moment. Worldwide, you've got your standard project-based investment, nature-based solutions, grant, some of them commercial, some of them carbon. Landscapes put them together, and like the Jambi, the Indonesian example, you can get up to 200 million, even $500 million worth of investment into landscapes. You've then got a set of landscape investment funds that are starting to invest in these. So the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development is a €160 million program, looks like $250 million, investing in 10 landscapes around the world. And then you're seeing thematic funds that invest across sets of forest landscapes or water landscapes. We've had a crazy month at the start of this year because there's a New York investor that's putting together a bid to buy 6 oil concessions in the Congo. There's an auction for oil concessions. They think they could raise $400 million. They'll retire the oil rights, turn them into protected areas managed by the local communities, And they estimate $6 billion commercial return on carbon and biodiversity payments. Now, we haven't seen the figures yet, but that's the sort of thing that's coming down the line. So, and I think Queensland can be part of that. All right. So I won't go through all of that. The upside is that this stuff is powerful. It integrates. It's much larger and longer term thinking, and you can get 30 years of funding. Wouldn't that be nice? The downside is that we're making it up as we go along. We're building the plane as we fly. It's complicated. It's not easy, but it's starting to evolve. It's starting to happen. Anyway, so that's a quick summary of landscape finance, and
Thank you.
I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got one question off. Oh, I'm getting a no cash, so that's been started. Okay, so I've got a question, and Anne asked this of Bill, but I think it's relevant. I'll ask it to the panel. Anne asked, do you have a specific strategy for incorporating First Peoples values into your consultation and strategies? And I think that it was asked of you, Bill, but I think it could be, you had some comment on that as well, Paul. Bill, would you mind when you answered it, just to step up?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Great question, Anne.
Thank you.
It's great to see some old friends on the Zoom, including, well, I wouldn't call him a friend, Rob Conley. Yeah, one of the things, Simon Costanzo is one of the many Australians that came and worked with us in Chesapeake Bay, but he wanted to come back to Queensland. I don't know why. He wanted to come back here. And to make that work, we created a little company called Darwinian, because our first project was in Darwin, and Integration Application Network is the group we have in Maryland, so Darwinian. And so we did a integrated report card for Darwin Harbour. And to do that properly, what we found worked was when we independently, separately went out to the Aboriginal community and engaged with them one-on-one. Well, many of them, and Simon and me. And we got their values and then took that to the broader group, including the port and the equivalent of the Department of Environment, whatever they call it, in the Northern Territory, and all the usual suspects. But we started off with the Indigenous values. That was central. We said here's our starting point, and then we can work around that. We did have a couple of Aboriginal folks at that meeting, but they sat in the back and they didn't say anything. And that, I think, sadly, is typical. So I think the lesson I got from that is we need a separate outreach specifically for First Nations folks and put their values at the beginning and start the conversation from there and move forward from there. So that's the lesson I got from the Darwin Harbour. Chesapeake Bay, just to give you an example, we haven't had a very strong Indigenous voice in our region. It's been so many hundreds of years since they were displaced in the Trail of Tears and all the tragedies that we've had over history. But we just have a couple new students that are native born, not from our region, but they are investigating and starting to develop that conversation and building that relationship from scratch. So it's I think it's happening everywhere, but one of the lessons I've got is it's just like we do with this listening session. Start listening, start with them, and then bring that back to the broader group.
And I can add that our motto is landscapes first. To build a landscape program, that has to be done by the people in the landscape. The opportunity is for that to be owned by the people in the landscape. And as we've seen in Fiji and Ireland and now Scotland, we're setting up companies that those stakeholders own. So, in Fiji, Congo, or Ireland, everyone's Indigenous, or just about everyone is. So it's not so complicated. Here, just as Bill is saying, I think it's important to have that Indigenous voice in as part of the play, and with a veto right, perhaps also, and then create a structure that represents them in a fair way. You guys will know how to do that.
Thanks. I'm going to just, I've got there's some cracking questions coming in. So what is from Rod? Thank you, Rod, and acknowledge Rod, the chair of our science committee. Thank you, Rod, for coming online. Rod asks, what's your preferred strategy? Is it to, one, put up a good project and hawk it around for sustainable funders, or two, have a funder in mind and tailor a project specifically for them? Ooh, I thought that was a cracking question.
Yeah, all of the above, Rob. It's I think this is what we're going to be working on this afternoon.
What's the sort of salad? So we'll get the sort of
Yeah, so we'll come back to you. Tell you the answer. Not. But in building commercial landscape finance programs, you've got to have a return on income. So it's about looking at who's actually going to buy nature results, and how much are they willing to pay, and how can you create a system that allows them to do that. In the Irish case, you know, we've talked to 250 of the greenest businesses in Ireland, and they're absolutely clear. They need carbon credits. They want them from Ireland. They would love to buy them from peatlands. And if it also helps to grow biodiversity in those peatlands, they're in 100%. So finding that connecting the pipes so that the water can flow for commercial investment and the returns can come back, that's the critical question that you've got to be able to have an impression of, at least at the beginning, and then take it out and find ideally an early investor that's going to put some money in. The European Investment Bank has put money into the work in Ireland already, and we've got a philanthropic fund of a major tech company giving us $3.5 million for pilots. So they're not in there for philanthropy. They're looking at longer term benefits that they can get out of it.
I'm going to try to just build on those questions. That Margie had a good question here, which follows up directly or is related to what you talked about. To what extent do these initiatives, both Bill and Paul, rely on policy? That was a really good question. It's very challenging. Like, can you do, like, there's a carbon market, but in terms of biodiversity, it's nascent, if that. So does this rely on policy, or can it be driven through other mechanisms that already exist, like ESG, and also it goes to the question to you about how do you need policy to make this stuff work, or can you rely on corporates in the community?
Talking about investment, there has to be a return.
Yeah, I had a question in mind of my book about return. To get the return.
So I have a quick go.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. You can do it against policy. In Congo, the government was supporting carbon on one side and destroying rainforests on the other, and selling off mining and oil concessions. So we built this program against policy. But what we found, and what the government found pretty quickly, is when they could see that there's $170 million coming into one province, which was 10 times the budget of that province annually, they immediately got behind it. And in fact, it became incorruptible, or close to that. The only corruption we saw was from a carbon company based in America, and there was some hints from some of the World Bank staff were doing some dodgy stuff. But within the Congo, there was astonishingly zero corruption we could see over 10 years of operation. So if you build it big enough, a policy will get behind it, and if there's enough money, it becomes a vehicle that drives itself.
So the question about policy and report cards is two words I think that really matter with report cards: transparency and accountability. That transcends policy, because if everyone shares this news, this data, they can make their own decisions based on that data. You don't need to go through government to get the right thing happening. One of the most satisfying things we started seeing in Southeast Queensland when we started report cards, met some dairy farmers from up in the hinterland, and they said, Oh, we read this thing. We decided we're going to figure out how to better do our manure management of our dairy farm, because they shared we shared the data, we shared the story, and they made their own decisions. So I think that's really important, that transparency and accountability. When I was here in 2011, we arrived as the floods came for a sabbatical, and Anna Bly was the premier at the time, and she was doing a great job briefing people about the flood and what was going on. She'd have this council, and then she'd come out to the reporters. And I wrote her a letter. I said, this is transparency and accountability. This is what government should do. You should do this all the time after the floods. So she sent along her senior advisor to come talk to me, and I said, transparency and accountability. I said, I don't know about this transparency thing. You know, that's hard. Of course, she didn't get reelected. That's her damn fault. So I think transparency and accountability are important, and that's a driver of policy. I think that's very much what Paul's saying, is that you can almost transcend the corruption in the government and the personalities by having the data shared by all. Sorry about Anna Bly.
No, I think that was a good example. And I think COVID also created a situation in Australia, a positive situation where we actually saw, I think for one of the first times that science was involved, it appeared, at least to us, that scientists, doctors, were being asked for advice on a regular basis to guide what government should do. And so I think that's where we need to go with nature. I'm going to harp on this a little bit because I'm keen to understand a bit too on Margie's question. There's also a question from Trevor. And Trevor says, well, recognising the incredible environmental returns, what returns do investors get? In other words, and I think this is what Margie was getting to, is how do investors actually get, you gave the example of the Congo where there's actually, you stop pulling oil out of the ground and therefore there's a carbon benefit and the carbon market can pay for it. Is it just the carbon market, or are there other direct returns that investors could, that we know about right now?
Yeah. Well, that Indonesian case with Michelin was not carbon at all. In fact, they could have added a carbon element into it. They didn't. What was driving it for them was the awareness that there's a market for green rubber, wildlife-friendly rubber, they called it, and it genuinely was. They were allowing the jungle to grow back in a fair bit of their plantations, which allowed more space for nature, for wildlife. They were also doing it because green money is cheaper. In Indonesia, the cost of money is pretty high from local banks. If you've got a green product, you can take it you can get concessional money, not so much in Indonesia, but internationally. So the interest rate that they were paying on the money was much lower. They did quite nicely compared to their normal banking. The other reason that they were doing it was because was reputation. If they went on business as usual and the rainforest got destroyed, this could destroy their reputation globally. If they protect it, they can build their reputation even further. So I think you're seeing particularly that one driving a lot of investment today. We're also seeing regulation. The EU is demanding deforestation-free products, and they've just really cracked down on that hard. So anyone selling into the EU has got to get this stuff sorted. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. And as is my ability, because I am the provocateur, I'm going to ask what I consider to be a fairly provocative question of Bill and Paul. So I'll ask you just to come up on each answer, give your thoughts in closing. I've got the question is to follow. So we've known for a long time.
Can I give you money so I don't have to?
Unfortunately, $10 is not even enough for a beer anymore. So we've known for a long time that the environment's in decline. We also know what to do. So we know what to do in considerable detail. Someone's at the door. It's like working from home. And yet we haven't managed to get the investment that we really need to date. So what is it about what you've talked us today? You've told us some stories about what you guys are doing in the world. what is it that's different that's going to get us a different outcome? Or we just turning dials and in a different way? I think I know what you can say, but I'll let you answer. So what are we doing? What's different about what you're proposing that's going to make the change that we've all been looking for decades?
Really do want to pay, not have to answer. So, one of the things that I think we've got to recognize is that if we stay in the water environment sector, we're never going to get the resources we need to get the job done. That we have to expand, including the social, economic, and cultural values of the community. When we go to these listening sessions, that's what we hear over and over. The broader view. So in engaging that, I mean, green economy can be good news for folks, and that's a growth industry as Paul's alluding to with all these case studies. I think that what we have to expand our view of what we're looking when you talk about land and water. It's land, water, and people. It's the people part of the equation that's going to make the difference. And so we have to connect with people, connect with their values, connect with their hope and inspiration to give them that vision for the future. One of the things when we started seeing progress in Chesapeake Bay, the NGOs were really worried that all this, they had decades of save the bay and bay is going bad, give us money. And the good news is starting to shake their belief. Are we going to still be able to raise money? Well, the survey shows, we had a political pollster go through the survey. The survey showed people willing to pay more and do more with positive news. So one of the things we've learned is when we do our report card, we're honest. We say there's some things we need to fix, but we also celebrate any small victory that we have because that inspires more action, more activity. So that's one piece of that answer. It's not the whole answer, but we're working toward it by being more inclusive and bringing people into the equation.
Yeah, that's a
No, it's good.
it's a serious question. Look, we're on the Titanic. Seriously, when I look at it globally, I mean, you all know it, and we're actually speeding up. And I'm not seeing that nature-based solutions investment is slowing us down in any way. In the 1980s in Scotland, they had all these fantastic investments in forests. But you fly into Edinburgh today and you see these pockmarks of horrible citrus spruce that weren't invested in a way that thought about ecology, and they're really not economically very intelligent. And that's what's happening with carbon investment right around the planet. It's all tree planting projects that are just dropped out of the sky. Chicken pox investment, I call it. Sorry to be really brutal about this, but I think if we're smart about it, and it's actually the systems thinkers like you guys that can make the difference, we can put together the large-scale environmental solutions, long-term environmental solutions, with the finance and the politics. And what inspires me is the 1840s and the invention of the railways. George Stephenson didn't invent the railway. He just built a very good railway on a 25-kilometre rail and won the race in 1840. What he invented was the railway company, which brought together the politicians, the financiers, and the engineers. And within 10 years, he had created the equivalent investment of the GDP of the UK. Astonishing. And had inspired the building of 10,000 kilometres of railways around the planet. Astonishing stuff. That's where we are now with the environmental revolution, but let's forget chickenpox investment. Chickenpox projects, let's get serious, which is about really intelligent design and, led by like you guys. Thanks for the close.
Oh, well said. Thank you very much. Okay, look, thank you. Look, we've run over time, and thanks to everyone online that stayed, and of course the team here and all the guests at Healthy Land and Water. You know, there is a investment plan being developed for Southeast Queensland around our natural assets, and wouldn't it be great if they considered using that landscape methodology based on all of this evidence and data and knowledge that we have sitting and have invested in over 23 years in Southeast Queensland. So I'll leave that as a thought. I'd like you to join me, please, in thanking both Paul and Bill, very inspirational speakers, and it's fantastic to see that what we're doing at home, it transcends and is about in the rest of the world, is internationally transcendable. So thanks to everyone. Thank you to the guests, and we'll go have lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.